Okay, so in this video we're going to see different structures of the brain, like the lobes, cranial nerves, etc. So the brain is separated into two hemispheres by the longitudinal fissure, which is this. So this is the right hemisphere, this is the left hemisphere. So this is the superior view of the brain, anterior, posterior, and inferior. So for the lobes of the brain, this will be the frontal, then this will be the parietal, temporal, and occipital. Now in the inferior part of the brain, closer to the frontal lobe, and from anterior to posterior, we have the emerging of the cranial nerves. So we have cranial nerve number 1, or olfactory, cranial nerve number 2, or optic, cranial nerve number 4, or abducens, cranial nerve number, trochlear, cranial nerve number 5, or trigeminal, cranial nerve number 6, or abducens, cranial nerve number 7, or facial, cranial nerve number 8, or vestibulocochlear, cranial nerve number 9, or glossopharyngeal, cranial nerve number 10, or vagus nerve, cranial nerve number 11, or spinal accessory, and cranial nerve number 12, or hypoglossal. Cranial nerve number 3, it's not labeled in here, but it is this one. And this one, it is called oculomotor, but they didn't label it. Now, here we have the midbrain. Here is the pons, and this is the medulla oblongata, and this is the spinal cord. And then posterior to the brain, and then inferior, we have the cerebellum. This cerebellum helps us to maintain equilibrium. Now, if you see a mid-sagittal view of the brain, you will be able to see several structures, like this one, that it is called the corpus callosum. The corpus callosum helps to communicate the left and the right hemispheres by sending axons between the right and the left hemispheres. Now here we have the anterior and posterior commissures that as well, they send axons between the right and the left hemispheres. This structure that you see here, this is the thalamus, and the thalamus is below this ventricle, which is called the lateral ventricle. So the lateral ventricle is found between the thalamus and the corpus callosum, and we have a lateral ventricle as well in the other hemisphere. And then this will be the hypothalamus, and in here we have the pons, of course. This will be the midbrain in here, and this will be the medulla oblongata. Within the lateral ventricles, we have cerebrospinal fluid that circulates in between the lateral ventricles with the interventricular foramen, and then from there the cerebrospinal fluid will move into the third ventricle, and then this will do so by using a foramen, or transferring the cerebrospinal fluid from lateral to the third ventricle using the foramen of Monroe. And then the CSF, the cerebrospinal fluid, will flow from the third ventricle into the fourth, which is found in here in between the pons and the cerebellum, which is this, through the cerebral aqueduct, or the aqueduct of Sylvius. So, and then from the third ventricle, the fourth ventricle, which is here, the cerebrospinal fluid can flow into the subarachnoid space around the spinal cord, and also through the center of the spinal cord, which is this, which is called the ependymal canal. Now here is the mid-sagittal section of the cerebellum, showing this structure in white color, which is called the arbor vitae. So several of the axons of the neurons that brings information to and from the cerebellum transfer this information through this arbor vitae, or tree of life. And then one of the functions of the cerebellum will be to maintain equilibrium. Now here in the pons, we have several centers, cardiovascular centers, and also in the medulla oblongata we have cardiovascular and respiratory centers that helps to control these functions of respiration, and then heart rate and contractility of the heart. Now, below the thalamus, we have the hypothalamus. Within the hypothalamus, we have several centers that controls hunger, controls temperature, and also you can produce some hormones like antidiuretic hormone, or ADH, and oxytocin, that are sent into the pituitary gland, which is this, that is found here in this bone, the sphenoid bone in the sella turcica. And this pituitary gland will store the ADH and the oxytocin and then release it into the body. And also the pituitary gland produces several hormones that are going to control the different glands in our body. So I guess we pretty much cover everything for the brain, and this is all for this video.